What's the sorrow of life and death and love and loss, and life and death and love and loss? And will you be there to grieve it? The life and death and love and loss, and life and death and love and loss. And will you be present to receive it when you ride on, stride on, be strong, ride on, stride on, and sing out your song. And if they told you from the time of birth that you got no word, don't you listen to a word, my friend, 'cause you know that you are a star. You really are in a sea full of change, and you might get shunned, but you won't get spun. Your soul is burning with the fire of the sun, and when the tide rolls out, you're crawling to the shore. You're gonna dig down deep, 'cause you know you got some more, my friend. Ride on, stride on. All right, we're gonna get started, folks. So if you can find your seats, we're gonna do this. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, say your goodbyes for now, because you're gonna be able to see everybody right afterwards. And there's gonna be a potluck at Woodstock Park following the memorial, and we're gonna wrap it up now. So, ride on, stride on, be strong. Ride on, stride on, and sing out your song.
And that was plugged into this one over here? Yeah. Oh, there. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Louder. Okay. Closer and louder. Can everybody hear me okay? Good morning. We are here earlier than Dan Handelman would ever want us to be. So this is in his honor. Good morning, everyone. Welcome on behalf of Dan's family and Peace and Justice Works. We're grateful to see so many people here today and to honor the life of Dan Handelman. I'm Ashley Albies. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a civil rights attorney here in Portland. I've had the honor and privilege of knowing and working with Dan for over 20 years. These past 12 or 13 years as one of my clients, which for folks, as people can imagine, having Dan as a client is a tremendous experience. He got to tell me what to do, which was really, really fun for him, I'm pretty sure. I'll be facilitating this morning's festivities, and we have a program today, so you know what to expect. We'll follow the program as best we can that you received on the way in. There'll be an opportunity towards the end for a few more people to speak. In honor of Dan's testimonies at City Hall, we were going to ask people to keep your remarks to about 3 minutes. And I will hold you to it in his honor. And it's also not just for the fun factor of 3 minutes at City Hall, but there's a lot of people that we're certain want something to say, and we want to honor, as Dan would, everybody's ability to speak. If we don't get to you today, there'll be more opportunities to speak at the potluck at Woodstock Park after this. A few logistics: there's bathrooms to the back and near the entrance when you first came in. I want to note that this stage is being broadcast and recorded and will be replayed on Open Signal and Community Access Television. The other thing I want to say is when you get up to this mic, please lean in close and speak slowly and carefully. If you're going really quick and it makes sense, there's a lot of emotion here today, I might tap you just to give you a little heads up that you're speaking too quickly or you need to step a little closer to the mic. I think that's it for logistics, and we're about to get started. So I want to first invite Barb Green, Dan's life partner, and who will be followed by Dan's brother, Matt Handelman. Turn this one on. Okay. Thanks, Ann. Oops.
Actually, do you want to hold it or you need to?
No, we're gonna speak into it. I can hide behind it.
And with Barb today will be Shelley Bedell, who will assist with any assistance needed.
Thank you, Ashley. There's been a little change to the program. It says that my tribute was going to be read by Shelley, but I thought it would be strange for her to stand up here and say, Dan was the love of my life. I'd feel a little odd about that. Thank you all so much for coming today to celebrate the life of Dan. It's wonderful to see so many of the people he loved in one spot. Actually, I can't see you, but I know you're out there. I'm sure you've all heard stories about people who died and came back and said that while they were technically dead, they floated up and looked down on what was going around. I'm thinking there's a good chance that Dan is up there right now, looking down on us. Dan Handelman wouldn't miss a meeting, would he?
Nice line.
So I'd appreciate it if you all would join me in saying, hi, we love you, Dan. Hi, Dan, we love you. Thank you so much. I feel very grateful and privileged to have had Dan in my life for 30 years. He was my life partner, my person, my boo, the love of my life. I wasn't sure I'd get that far. I'm glad I did. We shared a love of peace and justice, cats, cemeteries, crossword puzzles, theater and movies, places like the Peculiarium. And they said I should say this, then of course, fart jokes. Okay, he wanted this to be a happy occasion, which reminds me of Dr. Seuss, who said, don't be sad that he's gone, be happy that he was here.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Actually, I think he was talking about an ice cream cone, but the principle's the same. So, by the way, we had a practice of picking a word for the day every morning from some cards I made to try and start the day on a positive note. And they're right down there by the toilet paper. And the word for today is be happy. And Dan wanted people to be happy here. He wanted this to be a joyful, not a sad occasion. Also, if anybody, we forgot Kleenex, so we've got toilet paper here, which is what Dan used, so it's appropriate. And if anybody needs some, we can pass it back there. Dan and I learned a lot from each other. He taught me video editing and how to change the spark plugs on my Toyota and keep it running for 37 years. Not as long as his, but close. I taught him how to take care of cats and cook vegan food. I learned about the prevalence of police abuse from him, and he learned about animal rights from me. He was very, very smart. He was an amazing organizer, a fluent speaker and writer on many complicated subjects. I was in awe of the amount of words that could come out of that man, as I'm sure anybody who's read the People's Police Report can attest to. He was also very funny, except for some of those puns, which were pretty bad. And he was fun to be around. He could make tax returns for corporations entertaining. We both appreciated deep philosophical thought. I write those down here in my happy book. When things are tough, I can look back through pictures and writings. Like one of them by Alice Walker said, "Resistance is the secret of joy," which I ponder. I'm not sure I get it. Dan called his latest car Joy. I don't remember why. If anybody knows, please let me know. Another quote that Dan lived by is this one: "May evil beware, and may good dress warmly and eat plenty of vegetables." And that, of course, is the superhero, the Tick, who also said, "When evil is afoot and you don't have any arms, you got to use your head. And when evil is ahead and you're behind, you got to do the legwork. But when you can't get a leg up, you got to be hip." we like the Tick. The original is the best, not the remake. I have a passage somewhere that I can't find right now from a book co-written by the Dalai Lama. The gist is that research shows when people are happy, they are more accepting of others and more peaceful. His conclusion is that if we want the world to be a better place for everyone, it is our duty to be happy. So I know things are dire out there, but Dan wants us to be happy. Dr. Seuss wants us to be happy. The Dalai Lama says it's our duty to be happy. Heck, the universe gave us a card that said, and they want us to be happy. So I guess maybe we should be happy. That's kind of where this stops, because I was trying to finish this last night, but I'd already taken my cannabis to sleep. And so it just kind of fizzles out there. So I just wanted to tell you, when someone was leaving, like if Dan was leaving, he would always say, "See you sometime," which is what he said to me on one of our first dates. I think he was trying to be cool. And I said, "See you later," because I didn't want to repeat the same thing. And then I said, "Call me sometime." So I was trying to be like, not needy. And he said, "I think I just did." And that became one of our things. And he said that to me every morning for 30 years, and I still think it's funny. So, hey, be kind, get in good trouble, and you guys have fun out there.
I'm probably going to break rules. Dan did too. I'm his brother, Matt. One rule I'm going right through is the 3-minute rule. I can tell you that. I sort of insisted because it's hard to put 59 years for me into 3 minutes. So also, it's going to be hard not to be sad, even though I'm happy. So Barb, thank you. That's beautiful. And thank you all for being here. So I'm going to have a few words with Dan now. So Dan, I'm going to open with movie reference. I'm sorry, because I'm going to disappoint you, because it's not going to be about Star Wars or Monty Python and the Holy Grail or even Say Anything. Those things we used to talk about. We're going to talk about Groundhog Day. You might not remember that when our parents died, in quick succession, I wrote an article for my school's newsletter saying it felt like Groundhog Day. Waking up to the same thing like a nightmare, day after day. And, I think that was supposed to gird me for the future and the challenges of life. But Dan, you went and wrote the sequel. Sorry. I'll get better, I did. Thanks. So you left this earth not 8 months after our other brother, David. I wasn't ready for it. And I know you didn't mean to do this to me or to Barb or your loved ones or the whole city of Portland. But, your departure has been so jarring to so many of us. I don't think I ever would have been ready for it, despite the girding. So after David died, you were shaken and always looking for ways to do something. And perhaps the sweetest thing that you said to me was that even though you knew that you didn't have the same connection I had with David about sports, that you promised you'd always be there for me. Talk about stuff, old times. I do, though, have some sports-related stories that I remember about you and about us. I'm sure you remember that when we were about 4 and 5 years old, our family went to a Mets game together, and as always, we packed our own food and snacks. And we were sitting in their stands, and you reached down to that bag of stuff and to get a Nestle's Crunch bar out. It was Nestle's Crunch then, not Snickers. And right when you reached down, one of the Mets hit a home run, and you missed it. And that tender heart of yours, Dan, you cried and you cried. And my mom, very quick on her feet, said, "Don't eat that. It's magic." So for many years after that, we carefully packed it back up, kept in the wrapper, put in a plastic bag, put in the freezer, and for years and years, Dan would always remind us when we went to the Mets game, we have to get the magic Nestle's Crunch Bar. So I thought about that promise the other night also when I was trying to write this memorial, this testimonial for you. And I was sitting in a dark apartment listening to a Mariners game because I transplanted to the West Coast just like Dan did. And I kept toggling over on my computer to the flyer with that picture on it and staring at it. And, I was sort of procrastinating. And I realized, though, when I kept looking at that, the Mariners started doing better. And sure enough, in the bottom of the ninth inning, they won it. And even though I didn't have that magic Nestle's Crunch Bar with me, you were my lucky charm. And that wasn't the first time or the last time, like Barb said, that I know that you're up there watching and taking care of me like a good big brother you've always been. As kids, since we were less than a year and a half apart, we shared a lot. We listened to 45s in your room and maybe sometimes talked about girls who also happened to be sisters that we liked. We also played with G.I. Joes. Sorry, I don't know if I should say that here. It's just our little secret. We would endlessly watch syndicated reruns of Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch, Bugs Bunny. How violent those shorts were, huh? And the Partridge Family, just to name a few. And you were always much more of a Star Trek fan than I was. When I think of you when we became adults, 2 front porch arrivals are seared in my memory. One involved tears, and the other your big, once signature smile. Do you remember? I've told the one about the tears many times since you've gone. I was at the house that we were living in here in Portland 35 years ago. You came home from work with tears streaming down your face. Our government had started dropping bombs in Iraq. Your sincere and heartfelt sadness about the innocent victims was beyond palpable. It led you from your eclectic theater work being your focus, with piecework on the side, to just the opposite. For the next 35 years, your peace and justice work was front and center, with your other work and frankly most everything else in your life secondary. I've been so impressed and proud of your singular focus. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? It's led me to say many times over the years to people who might not know you so well that the world needs more Dans. Well, now there's a gaping Dan-sized hole in that statement. Your actions have inspired others to speak up for what they believe in, to give a voice to those who otherwise wouldn't have one or who had perhaps lost theirs. Let's go back to the front porch arrivals. The other one with a smile was over 28 years ago. You still had it in you to separate from your important work and come up to Seattle to meet my firstborn child, Isaac, who's here with us. I remember opening the door to your beaming smile, the same smile that Mom always said people stopped her when she was strolling you in the stroller when you were a teeny tiny kid because you were so damn cute. That was also the first time I had the privilege of meeting Barb. And, I know that you were so lucky to have her for those 30 years. I like to think of that joyous time, and also of the times that as Uncle Dan, you delighted my daughters, Shay and Megan, who are also here, lightheartedly playing Monster with them, eliciting shrieks of laughter. I know that despite your very public persona in Portland, you remained a very private person, not often letting people into your world or letting people know you. Despite that, and despite the injustices that you relentlessly fought, I know that the people closest to you understood and could feel your tender heart. Today, I know we're going to hear from many people from this great community and what they thought about you. But I also want to make sure that you hear some of the people from your past and what they've said about you and your untimely death. I'll start with a smattering of comments from Facebook from people from our hometown. And I know that even if you're watching, that you're not looking at Facebook because you would not do that. So here it goes. Dan was such a gentle, kind soul. Dan was such an amazing friend and brought so much laughter to everyone. What a beautiful, inspiring human. Dan was the heart and soul of the drama club, that's for sure, and just a hugely energetic and funny, eminently likable guy. The world lost a good one this week, one of a kind. I fondly remember him bopping along down the school hallways. Picture that. He was always smart, always prepared, always smiling, always enjoying class. I doubt there was anyone in our class who did not admire him. And finally, as I think of Dan now, it is with a smile remembering his unique spirit. So Dan, were you watching a few weeks ago when I had the wonderful opportunity to Zoom with some of your closest high school friends? One of whom is in the audience today. Sorry, it feels like night because it's so dark in here. Well, despite not being in as much contact in recent years, you truly left a lasting impression on all of those people. They had the urge, the need to get together to reminisce fondly about you, about the kind, joyful, smart, and witty friend that they had. And your college friends felt the same way. Your three closest college friends also have sort of reunited because of your death. Maybe you know I've been in touch with them. So many of your friends from way back told me that you were quite the prolific communicator, sort of like what Barb said. The number of people who have told me how many letters that they saved, typewritten letters that Dan wrote them years and years ago. So one of your college buddies, Dan, found one of them and wrote something so touching to me and so right on the nose that I couldn't say it better. So I thought I'd read it to you here. This is something we've discussed a bit, our small college crowd, how Dan was when we first knew him, not that focused on social change, political issues. An incredibly generous, giving, and kind-hearted person. The ingredients were all there, but not, at that point, as involved as he would later become. I remember with some clarity how Desert Storm affected Dan. He was really worried about a high school friend of his who had been called up to serve. I had never heard him react like that before to something in the news, a geopolitical event. He was really, really rocked by it all. It is the Dan I knew and was honored to know in the most formative years of my life. And yet, it leaves me, sorry, I'm breaking the rules here, with an extra bit of sadness. When Dan committed himself to social change, he committed such much of his happiness, his well-being, a lightness to his spirit, an outlook, maybe even his health. Rereading his letter, I feel both the lightness of his soul and outlook circa 1986, and then the huge weight that he would bear on his shoulders. Sorry. In the decades to follow, he chose a hard path to walk. What a blessing to the Portland or any community to have someone who will bear that weight each and every day with every hour they have for decades. Pretty spot on there. So Dan, I feel lucky that we got to live together here in Portland as young adults for more than a year. I still remember trying to get rid of all the junk mail that came to our house for the previous resident, whose name was Beulah Hammond. We couldn't forget it because we got so much mail for her. The stacks and the laughs. That's also when you taught me all about recycling. Back when we had to go to the like recycling center that was under the freeway to sort all the recycling. I guess I can blame or thank you when people give me a hard time for picking through their garbage and taking things out to put them in the recycle bin. More than a quarter century later, I returned to the area to live for a couple of years, just across the bridge in Washington. And even though you were so busy with the work, you carved out time for about one dinner every month. You diligently find and suggest a place that was interesting and also satisfied your vegetarian needs. And like with everything, you documented for posterity the various venues we went to. I wish we'd had more meals, more time, but I'll always cherish what we did share. So again, what does it mean to need more Dans in this world? You've modeled for me, for us, dedication to yourself, to what energized you, to what brought you joy, perhaps, what you cared deeply about. As our parents did, you modeled service to others and your community. Yes, I'm sorry you didn't take more time off than 2 days a year, literally, and find more time to do things that brought you joy. But that was you, relentless and self-sacrificing till the end. So, to the man who knew about and worked toward justice, peace, and peaceful accountability long before it was mainstream, who quietly became a vegetarian for moral reasons, to the man who will always be my big brother, I speak for many when I say I'm going to miss you dearly and never forget you. I love you, Dan.
Thank you, Matt and his family. Thank you, Barb and Shelley. The next 4 speakers are Donna Hayes, myself, Seema Pusani, Desiree Helligers. Can y'all just be ready to come up in that order on stage? And Donna.
Okay, my name is Donna Hayes. I met Dan at a city council meeting. This man didn't know me. I didn't know him. But he sat right beside me and spoke for my family, dealing with police accountability. I thought this was the smartest man alive. The things that rolled out of his mouth was just amazing. And I had to follow him ever since then. I went to some of his protests. I got an email quite often from him. And I read every last one of them. Because to me, this was the smartest man alive. He just sitting across from me and listening to him speak for my family that he never met a day in his life. And to hear the words that rolled off his lips, I'll never forget. He was just awesome, great. Well, we did have some disagreements too. It wasn't always paradise. Him and my nephew had clashes because my nephew had a tendency to support the police in certain matters that Dan didn't agree with. And I didn't get an email, I got a telephone call. And he tell me, your nephew is diluting the whole thing. And here I am trying to explain my nephew's side. He didn't want to hear it. And I didn't care, as long as he didn't abandon me. Okay, if he want to step out on my nephew, go right ahead. I do it too. But he had a passion for social justice that I don't think nobody on the planet to this day has. He believed wholeheartedly, deep in his soul, about fighting for what is right. And he was one of the reasons why I stand up and fight. Because I watched this man that didn't know me, spoke for me and my family, and stood up for my family, do it. I had no other choice. I wanted to be like Dan. And I kept wondering who would want to be like Dan. He was great. And what broke my heart was when I got the telephone call. And I felt like my whole world just was ripped apart. But it wasn't, because I got every email, I saved them, that Dan ever sent me. And I can go back and read it and still say, nobody can take his place. I don't think nobody as smart as he is. And I'm so glad and honored that he was my friend. Thank you.
So I'm back. As I said at the outset, I'd known Dan for about 20 years, initially with his work in getting Portland out of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He was tenacious. And I like to just kind of think about Dan as like the Google of police accountability in this town. If I couldn't remember what happened when and at what year or what meeting something happened, I would text him or call him or email, and he inevitably knew. It was in the recesses of his beautiful brain that he could collect and maintain and synthesize all this information and organizing over the 30 years. And I had the pleasure of representing Dan as the representative for Portland Cop Watch, as a member of the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform in the Department of Justice litigation against the city of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau regarding excessive force against people who are experiencing mental health crisis. And so it was in that role that he was my client. And like I said earlier, it was really, I think, really fun for him to be able to push back at some of the legal positions we were taking. But what I really think of as an advocate and as an attorney representing people is to make sure that my clients have information so that they can make informed choices. And I feel like Dan provided that for this city. He just knew information. He was tracking what was going on with police accountability and oversight, and he would provide information to us advocates, to city council members, to staffers with any public entity, to the police department, so that we could make informed decisions. We often were pushing for a position that ultimately wasn't the one that was taken, much to many of our frustration, but he was always there to provide context and more information, and this depth of knowledge was simply incredible. And as people have said, it's leaving a gaping hole in our community that will never be fully filled. I'm profoundly grateful to have had the opportunity to work with him, alongside him, and on behalf of him in his role of accountability, and just to be a partner and an advocate with somebody who was so committed to justice and peace. I recall one occasion where I was really, really frustrated at a very logical, very simple police oversight concept that failed at City Council or at the Department of Justice. Those concepts got twisted and by either the city or the Portland Police Bureau. I don't remember specifically what it was. It happened so often. But I said something to Dan. I was kind of debriefing and my frustration with him on the phone. I said something to him. I don't remember what it was, but like, oh, how do you keep doing this year after year? And his kind of response was like, well, what are you going to do? Nothing? And it really just struck me that that was his attitude and mentality, is like, well, what are you going to do? Sit on the sidelines and do nothing? No, like, this is our role, and our goal is to provide safety for everybody. Everybody deserves dignity. Everybody deserves to go home safe, the police and community members alike. And that was his striving goal, and that was rooted and based in a deep belief in humanity, that everyone deserved dignity, everyone deserves safety. And it is a profound love of humanity to be able to work tirelessly for that goal across political spectrums, across different groups. And to be able to have worked with him has really been an honor. I think about him often. There's always something I want to call and fact check with him, or to tell him something great happened, right? Or to commiserate in a setback. And I honestly don't want that feeling to go away. I have such gratitude for what Dan brought to our community, what he brought to my life as an advocate and as a person living in our community. And that tinge of sadness in missing him, as Barb had said, it's just reflective of how wonderful he was. And so I hope it stays with me.
Pardon me, I'm getting old. When I first met Dan, he felt huge, overwhelming, like a single giant redwood surrounded by nothing but saplings. Though in reality, he was just but a humble, magnanimous tree. I was quick to realize his knowledge and ideals. They were so foundational and true to me. I quickly found a mentor and guide in him. From there, a very powerful 8 years of growth began. And over those years, I've had many voicemails from Dan. It's usually how he communicated with me, because I was too busy either cooking or tending to my children's ever-evolving needs. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. I saved virtually every one of them, and I never knew why until now. Some call this serendipity, others call it kismet. I like both. When we would talk, it would be long. His humor and wit, a thing of beauty. Barb. And I never missed the chance to say at the end of the call, I love you, man. And he would say, haha, okay. I mean, it was my thing to mess with him too. Make him squirm a little. Faith and I were talking about it back there, looking at these pictures, calling him a killer cutie, and how he would squirm if he heard it. But it was also true, and I hope he really knew it. This work was personal to him, and I saw it, and defended him when it was questioned, like others here did. Existence is something we take for granted. And though it's difficult to pursue the work he and I shared without my phone ringing ever again, I couldn't feel more confident today knowing that the work he embodied and communicated using seemingly archaic legacy systems that would have a to, from subject line and a text message, piles of brain dump in so many ways I was blessed with, as we've heard of, I actually retained. Though I cannot, will not replace a Dan Handelman, I feel confident today that we can, will carry his legacy on. Existence that doesn't cease, but now a field of trees, evergreen, rooted and stout, are we now. I love you, Dan.
Great. So when I first met Dan, it was sometime in the late 90s. It was tax day, and he was sitting at a table in front of the post office, a carnival barker calling people to step up and participate in a penny poll. He and his comrades handed out fistfuls of change and encouraged people to vote their own values, to decide which among the labeled jars they would support, from healthcare, housing, I am having a hard time reading, from healthcare and housing and education to weapons and war and police. What that poll demonstrated was that overwhelmingly, numbers of us would choose healthcare and housing and all the rest of those human services over the, investing in the culture of war, death, surveillance, and police violence that Dan spent his life struggling against. What may not be immediately apparent about Dan, given the vast expanse of his singular focus, the organizing work that he did, is that he brought the same kind of singular focus to care work, right? And to building and modeling a culture of care at PJW, at Flying Focus, and beyond. When peace activist PJW member Ruth Holt became chronically and then terminally ill, Dan was a frequent visitor. In the final weeks of her life, Dan made and delivered milkshakes to Ruth daily. And it gave her comfort to know that her cat Maddie would be adopted and spend many years being taken care of and loved by Dan and Barb. When the formidable, the seriously pissed off granny, Ann Huntwork, a longtime mentor and PJW member, needed a walker to get around, Dan quickly broke out his carpentry skills and built a ramp in front of the PJW office. Dan routinely arranged for Ann's rides to the office for meetings, helped navigate her way in and out of the building so that she could participate in the work of PJW for years to come. That is, when she wasn't locking down her wheelchair, her walker, or her, whatever it is that she had with her in front of the Broadway Recruitment Center to shut down the US war machine from chewing up more lives and more bodies. For a decade, Yvonne Simmons, a PJW member and his longtime member, a PJW member, and also a member of Flying Focus Video Collective, became ill. When she got back from Sarajevo, she'd suffered a brain injury, and Dan and Barb were beside her, helping to kind of support her while she learned to walk and talk again. When Yvonne developed dementia, Dan and Barb took point in cleaning out her apartment and putting her stuff into storage. And even before that, Dan spent years of daily work consulting with caseworkers, with social workers, nurses, healthcare providers to try to advocate for Yvonne and keep her in her apartment just as long as he could. And that involved things like, writing instructions on television, the television remote over and over again. And just, he really, really went to the wall for Yvonne. And when she finally had to move out of memory care, Dan and Barb took point on emptying her apartment, moving her stuff into storage. They adopted Yvonne's beloved cat, Sooty. And for the next 7 or 8 years, Dan served as Yvonne's financial guardian, attending monthly care meetings and visiting her weekly until her death 3 years ago this July. Even then, Dan served as her executor, arranging for her cremation, and on and on. But I take comfort in knowing that I take comfort in knowing that Dan was so deeply, deeply committed to care work alongside everything else, and in imagining that, I don't know where we go when we leave here, but I imagine that there's a hell of a kind of organizing, activist, artivist, welcome wagon waiting for Dan, and that somewhere there's a PJW potluck going on. So, how blessed are we to have known Dan and to still have so much to learn from and about his life. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for sharing. Next, we're going to have a 34-year-old video of Dan from the Flying Focus Collective. So this will be fun to see Dan from over 30 years ago. I'm going to move this podium and we can get it started. Can y'all see?
On September 19th, 1991, George Bush visited Portland. Many of you may know. Flying Focus Video Collective went out and broadcast live from the protest site. And one of the more interesting things that happened was people got arrested. Among those people, several of them have had the charges that were brought against them dropped. And one person was accused of inciting a riot on TriMet property. The charge of riot was dropped at the arraignment, and today I attended his hearing with TriMet, which would have reinstated his bus pass, which was suspended for 90 days. Now, one interesting thing to note here already is that his bus pass was suspended before he was convicted of anything. Therefore, under TriMet rules, you are guilty until proven innocent. Then, as the hearing began, they told him that the original charge of inciting a riot on TriMet property was dropped, but they were going to charge him instead with illegal deboarding a train. And therefore, his pass was suspended for 30 days. Right now it is October the 8th, and his pass has already been suspended for 19 days. The police officers claimed that the way they could prove that this person was standing on the station was at the station was that they have videotape of everything that happened that day, and they know what was going on, and they were watching him for 45 minutes before they actually arrested him. So they waited 45 minutes before going and arresting this person, and one of the reasons they gave was that they were physically afraid to go in and make the arrest at the time he was allegedly standing on TriMet property. Although what they eventually charged him with, remember, was inciting a riot and not standing on TriMet property. So the videotape in question brought up a statement from one of the police officers, which I want everybody out there in TV land to take to heart, because I thought that most people here on the left were paranoid about these sorts of things being real. But these things are real. The police said that they had been watching videotapes last week for 6 hours, videotapes of what went on in that protest, and they said that they have been making arrests for 3 days since then, and they're still making arrests now. That means that the video cameras that are being used by the police at these public events are being used so that they can go afterward, after the fact, and charge people with all sorts of crimes as benign as standing at a TriMet station and not getting on or off a train. So beware and get your camcorder and get out there and make sure that the police don't get away with doing anything seemingly benign either. That's my message to everybody today. Thank you very much.
Dan talking about the same things that he was talking about in these past couple of years. So his commitment to justice, his commitment to truth, his commitment to protesting police and unfair tactics and TriMet, those have all remained the same. Next, I would like to invite up Charlie Michelle Wesley, Debbie Iona, and Jason Renault. Yes, and we'll go in that order.
Let's see here. So I didn't prepare anything because I was going to read a poem that he was really fond of, that he recently saw. A PC had recorded me reciting that poem at a recent protest. I had my corner too, just like Dan does. And then I decided, well, it's not really fitting for this particular setting, so I wrote a poem last night real quick. It just seemed more personal to the relationship that Dan and I had. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Charlie Michelle Wesley. I'm a tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, this on our stolen land. And I would just like to say, welcome all my peaceful people, as Dan would say on the corner every Friday. He would refer to us as his peaceful people. And every time we would go march around downtown for 30 minutes, we would stop at the parking structures, especially when the doors were open, and he would encourage us all to shout out, "No war!" because it would echo through the parking structure. And I don't know, I just made a few notes that, because I wasn't planning on speaking, but I want to introduce my poem in a way that you get to know our relationship. And so we were very adamant about justice. You know, there just seemed to be, everywhere you turn, injustices, and we both agree that wherever there's injustice, there's something to do. And I think that's why him and I are both so busy all the time. Fighting injustice seems to be a full-time job, and I just can't imagine ever just stepping back and going, I'm done, you know, just like Dan. He would have never been done with this fight, unfortunately. And we had some other things in common, like duct tape. I don't know if you've seen his gloves, but they're duct taped together. He won't buy new gloves, and you can't even give him new gloves. He wants his duct taped gloves, right? And I use duct tape for everything. In fact, one of my bracelets just broke, and so I mended it with black duct tape. So, and I was thinking about Dan the whole time I was doing that. And every time one of my kitties, because I had 3 cats that were aging out all in the same year, they passed away, and every time I would share that with him. You know, he had such compassion about that for me, and just was very sympathetic. And I was I guess I was kind of surprised that he was a cat person, but he definitely is, and I appreciated that. So many times, like we met on the Police Accountability Commission, and I just felt I was chosen for lived experience, and I was chosen for my activism, but I felt so very out of place because it seemed like most of the people on the Police Accountability Commission were so knowledgeable of the ins and outs of the injustice system that I call the policing and the way things are run. And I tried to quit several times, and he recognized something in me I didn't recognize in myself. He felt my voice was and my lived experience was very valuable to this process of creating a system that would actually hold the police accountable. And I really appreciated that. And I've also seen the side of him that when he couldn't get the entire Police Accountability Commission and our project manager to agree on something, or like the city attorney, et cetera, he would get so frustrated, and he would just pound away at that, and he was going to make these people understand why this is so important. And I could actually see how important it was. And it was his dedication to bringing about justice and police accountability in other areas was just, I don't know what word to use for it, but it was very impressive. And I appreciated it as a BIPOC person who is often targeted by the police. And you don't even have to be targeted for doing a crime. It feels like they look at you because of the color of your skin first, and then they'll find a crime. You know, and he got that. Anyway, every time I would do public testimony to city council, I'm pretty radically, I do some pretty radical truth-telling up there, and he would always just be, "Good job, Charlie." Good job. You know, speaking truth to power. And so anyway, yeah, just one other quick thing. I never heard him curse. That was something he was not fond of. Finally, the one time I think he spewed every word he had been holding in for his lifetime was actually when my comrade and friend, Dog, who was shot at Normandale, decided to die with dignity. And he just let it rip. It just tore him up that, you know, this was a white supremacist attack on a Black Lives Matters protest. And so he took 2 lives, but he has really damaged so many of us who were there emotionally. Yeah, he did have a huge heart. Anyway, here's what I wrote for Dan last night. I named it Because You Were You. Searching for guidance in fear and desperation, not knowing where to turn, I received an invitation. You're accepted to the Police Accountability Commission. I was like, what the? And out of respect for Dan, I won't finish that thought. I anxiously attended the meetings and noticed this very knowledgeable old white guy. Ultimately, through our shared courage, we connected. My severe lived experience and his confidence, no doubt. He repeatedly answered my 5,000 plus questions, and I tried patiently to correct his whiteness. And I'm sure my language hurts his tender ears, definitely challenged his endearing uptightness, but ultimately, we became a valuable team. His expansive police knowledge and quest for peace, and my traumatic life of police violence and justice dream. And finally, I would just like to say, the world is definitely a better place, Dan, because you were you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Debbie Iona, a longtime volunteer with the League of Women Voters of Portland. I first met Dan in 2000 when I participated in Mayor Katz's work group examining the city's first police oversight system. I was new to the issue, but as time went on, I figured out that Dan would be a helpful resource. That was the start of a 25-year relationship as colleagues and eventually as friends. I came to appreciate Dan's many strengths and how they contributed to his highly effective advocacy on police accountability. He knew policy inside and out. Not only did he know all the intricacies of Portland's system, he also knew other possibly more effective approaches from other jurisdictions. He benefited from an encyclopedic memory. We were regular attendees at police-related meetings. So at times I saw questions come up that committee members and city staff could not answer. But if someone said, "I'll bet Dan knows," he almost always had the answer. He made it a point to connect individually to people involved in the issues, identified what was important to them, and find common ground. He was also an extraordinary organizer and could assemble a group of advocates on a particular issue and turn them out so we made an impact. I worked with him on both police accountability and the city's relationship with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. There were some hearings over the years where we had an overwhelming turnout, and I credit Dan for reaching out, providing guidance, and persuading us to commit to showing up and stating our case. These strengths were a huge asset during our service on the Police Accountability Commission. The commission was assigned to figure out the details of Portland's new accountability system. We held all our meetings on Zoom, so it was much more challenging to connect with members individually. Dan devoted time and attention to reaching out and building a relationship with each member. His efforts paid off. The commission presented a unanimous recommendation to City Council, and even when the commission had ended its work, Dan worked to maintain the connections we built so we could continue to advocate for the empowered civilian accountability system we had designed. It is a tribute to him that after his death, we came together to join Charlie at the Friday rally and are contributing to bricks in his memory near his corner at Pioneer Courthouse Square. Dan could also be amusing and subversive. During Mayor Wheeler's term in office, he did not take testimony on reports. That ended our practice of testifying on the JTTF annual reports. One year, Dan came up with the idea of holding a mock hearing in front of City Hall. We set up a table and chairs with name tents for council members and took turns testifying to the empty chairs. The media covered it, and we probably got more attention that way than if Mayor Wheeler had allowed us to speak. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then I'm going to take an extra minute. So the next year was COVID, I think. He came up with we live streamed the city council meeting that was all virtual then, and did like a mystery science theater where there was live commentary. Yeah, so, he was definitely, the theater came out, from time to time. In addition to my gratitude for having had the privilege of working with Dan for over 25 years, we became friends. As many of you know, Dan did not readily share details of his personal life, but over time, he and I started sharing personal stories with one another or speaking informally about the news of the day. Sometimes when he was packing up the office, he'd give me a quick call just to chat. Now, when the phone rings at certain times of the day or evening, my first thought is that it must be Dan. Along with all of you, I miss him terribly. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jason Renault. I'm a mental health advocate here in Portland and a person with in recovery from addiction and mental illness. And I operate a small pressure group here in Portland, and we became interested in police reform, about 20 some years ago, and particularly around the use of lethal force against people with mental illness. And at the time, this was not much of a concern in Portland. Other cities and other communities had started thinking about it, and certainly people with mental illness and their families had been thinking about it. But it wasn't on the radar of police reformers here. So when I began talking about it, I was met mostly with blank stares, a lot of closed doors, with just two exceptions. Two people who didn't particularly know a lot about mental illness, were still willing to have conversations with me. They were willing to hold that door open, and those two persons were Joanne Hardesty and Dan Handelman. Now, they didn't do it for my sake or even really for the sake of people with mental illness. They did this mostly, well, in part because they were well raised as polite people. And second, because they understood something important, that doing this kind of work requires a big tent. More groups, more constituents. There were more people harmed that they hadn't originally considered. And that largeness of mind and that generosity was very unusual, and it encouraged us. It made us believe that maybe someone would listen. And if no one had listened, really, if all the doors remained closed, we'd probably gone on and done something else. But Joanne and Dan did listen, and so maybe we thought others might listen too. And in time, others did. And we ended up with a federal settlement agreement, massive retraining of police, a real and measurable reduction in the misuse of force, and particularly of avoidable force. And we have a more aware jail system in Portland now, and we have Portland Street Response. And we have perhaps a more aware public defense system. It's sort of comes and goes. And for a bit, we had a more aware district attorney. And now we also have the interest of civil rights attorneys, which is new. And that's made a big change and will continue to grow and make more change. But let me give one example, and I think we've heard of Dan's vigilance and Holy Spirit in City Hall. But let me give one example of why Dan's work mattered and why he'll be missed. As many of you know, and as has been commented earlier, Dan spent years working to build an accountability system for the Portland Police Bureau, and one which would hold officers accountable when they violated policy or used excessive force. And unfortunately, he was largely thwarted from that work when City Council threw out the civilian, community-designed accountability proposal and affirmed one designed by city attorneys and labor organizations. That new system, again designed by city attorneys and labor organizations, includes a nominating committee. We're getting into the dirty detail here, which weighed heavily toward law enforcement on that nominating committee. Police now have a decisive role in selecting who sits on Portland's Police Accountability Board. And you can imagine how discouraged Dan was by that. Talking about phone calls, I think for the last couple of years, the only phone calls I got after 9 o'clock that I actually picked up on were my son and Dan, and it's always the same talk for both of them. It's like, don't quit. Just the don't quit pep talk. Now, last week, that nominating committee submitted 40 names for consideration by City Council. And these are people who had applied to be on the accountability board. And now one of those board's rules that Dan was very much in favor of, and probably had something to do with putting in there, was that no one from law enforcement could be a member of the board, could be someone who deciding upon these civil actions. And law enforcement doesn't just include police, it includes parole officers, prosecutors, jail deputies, other sorts. But among the names selected by City Council last week were 2 prosecutors. Those names had been forwarded by the nominating committee. City Council staff knew those were prosecutors, and they know prosecutors are law enforcement. Now, a sharp member, thank you, Casey, in our group caught the error, and we were watching the City Council meeting online, waiting for somebody to say something. Now, surely I thought someone would speak up. Someone would say, okay, City Council, don't violate city code. But nobody spoke up. And both prosecutors were appointed to the Police Accountability Board. And that happened because Dan wasn't there. Dan would have been there in person at the microphone. He would have signed in early, been there early to get speaking time, and he would have gently pointed out the mistake. You have made an error. Here's how to fix it. You have alternates. Pick 2 of those, take the 2 prosecutors off. Problem solved. But Dan wasn't there. And so no one said anything. A lot of people knew, but nobody spoke up, and it's the combination of being observant, and that's the easy part, and being brave, speaking that truth to power. And that's the hard part. And Dan was good at both parts. And now they're members of law enforcement on Portland's Police Accountability Board. And that's why the city will miss Dan Handelman, because the city really needed him. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie, Debbie, Jason. We have 4 more people on the program next. We have Will Singer, Shelda Holmes, PC Perry, and Lisa Rips. Lisa is Dan's childhood friend and is not in your program, but will introduce herself.
I appreciated the way the speakers were warned about time limits. It brought me back to precisely what I wanted to talk about. Gratitude is, of course, a big deal these days. It's supposed to be very therapeutic. Well, it's pretty certain we could all use some therapy in these days. So I'm going to express my gratitude to Dan for being at least partly responsible for what was, for me, what was the most optimistic I've been, the most optimism I've experienced. For me, working with Dan, along with many other wonderful people, some of whom are here today, organizing as part of the Peace Network in our sadly wholly unsuccessful struggle to stop first the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and then the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Yes, at least my memory of those times was that I felt optimistic about the trajectory of history and humanity. It's really hard to feel optimism today. But of course, we must, at least we must try. But Dan, knowing Dan and working with Dan, well, you were with somebody whose actions, at least his actions, manifested so concretely that optimism, that belief that we can move the needle, maybe even bend the arc. Yes, it was going to be a lot of droll, drudgery work, but you'd be with people that you cared about and respected, And so when you stood amid the detritus of a really successful mobilization and you saw Dan there after the mobilization helping with the cleanup, I don't know what it was, but it felt good, and it felt that no matter how we might be failing for the moment, that all of this was on the right track, that we were building something meaningful, something that would eventually, sometime down the line, be a significant part of transforming this society, our society, for the better. I guess I still believe that, but it's a lot more difficult without Dan. Yes, I know. No individual can ever make a difference. We have to work together. We have to organize. We have to build community. But Dan knew that. Dan knew that, of course. Dan was all about building community and community organizing. The Peace Network was, at least in my experience, the largest and most impressive network of community organizations I've ever worked with, ever been a part of. And I'm pretty sure that it was Dan who insisted that you could not join the Peace Network as an individual. You had to be part of a group. Only groups could join. And that meant that you couldn't be a rugged individualist. You had to be working with at least one other person to create a group to be part of the Peace Network. So thanks for that feeling of hope, Dan. You were so much a part of that. And now, more concretely, I want to thank Dan for being one of those friends and comrades who felt that the peace movement, our local campaign, could not just be about peace. When people told us that talking about immigrant rights was only going to lose us support, and when people told us that foregrounding organized labor was risky, and most important of all, when people told us that talking about Palestinian rights was what? It was divisive. Having Palestinian speakers at our peace rallies, that was divisive. Well, thank you, Dan, for understanding, for knowing in your heart and in your wonderfully secular soul, that was just total nonsense. Thank you, Dan.
I think I'm next. I'm Shelda Holmes. Free Palestine. It's so important. Dan and I met shortly after I graduated from high school. Shortly after I graduated from 12 years of Catholic school. I was working with Amnesty International. It was the very early 90s. It was really a very heavy time for me personally and, of course, politically. Dan taught me that action is really the antidote to despair. Imagine me just out of Catholic school meeting this exceptionally compassionate carpenter. I saw a bit of faith in action that I was looking for. I'm incredibly secular, but nonetheless, neither of us were prophesizing religion. But he was a ridiculously simple living. Anyhow, it was an internal joke that he was a carpenter. Not so internal. Dan walked his talk. I never knew him to hold folks to any standard he wouldn't hold himself. He lived so simply. He really mastered reuse and repurpose before it was a thing. before the Triangle of Arrows campaign. Dan recognized his privilege and he shared it. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, "What would Jesus do?" I'm coming back to Jesus, sorry. What would Jesus do? And I thought, what would Dan do? Whether organizing the Peace and Justice Fairs, speaking KBOO, or a road trip to Berkeley, Dan was all in. He was also a mentor. He was a grown-up when I was still learning how to adult. When I didn't know how to handle an interaction with a cop as well as I could have, he would tell me, "All right, now you're going to go write down everything that happened. Here are some resources." Or the time I jumped on a table in a futile effort to make a point to a mansplaining bro that wasn't going to listen to me. Of course, he first said, "Please don't jump on folding tables ever again." And it helped me understand where my energy was best spent. Dan had an appreciation for theater, obviously, and allowed me to incorporate my theatrics into our organizing. He really helped me lean into the less angsty part of myself at a time in my life when I really needed it. And I will be forever grateful. Fast forward some 30 years, wow, to last July, when he sent me a text, "Happy birthday." The man's memory was insane. He never forgot my birthday. I've heard from so many people all over, dispersed all over our planet, people who had tremendous respect for Dan. He touched more lives than he could have possibly ever imagined. Maureen Newby used to own Clinton Street Theater. She got to know Dan because he rented the theater nearly weekly for years. She sent me a note sharing how much respect she had for Dan. She said he was a man of true integrity. It is said that honesty is telling others the truth, and integrity is telling yourself the truth. And Dan did that. Some people may think of Dan as some radical who just wanted to fight. You know, I've had to defend Dan a fair bit of times. But my experience couldn't be farther from the truth. My sister, Angie, remembers Dan being very kind and gentle with her as we were climbing Saddle Mountain once. She was only 12. I think back on that. I don't know what I was doing, but anyhow. She was only 12 and a bit freaked out because there was quite a bit of wash on a good portion of the trail. He was so calm and sweet with her. He was often the voice of reason and maturity in my circles. No, Dan did not want to fight. He may have been the most tenacious person any of us will ever know. Oh, I could hear Yvonne's words, like her voice in my head. "Oh, Dan, he's just such a softie." I can also hear Yvonne singing Ella's song in my head right now. "We who believe in freedom." But he didn't want to fight. He felt obligated to advocate for his fellow comrades and speak truth to power, a phrase that's come up so many times this morning. I believe Dan worked every day for peace and justice in hopes that our children wouldn't have to fight. There's this quote that makes me think of Dan. "Dripping water hollows the stone, not through force, but through persistence." That persistence to come back over and over again. I wanted to share one last story. Dan was a lot of fun. his sense of humor was ridiculous, but it wasn't easy for him to set down the work. So my crew, way back in those early 90s, was a ragtag group of stilt walking, face painting, drum playing, street circus-like pranksters. We liked to have a good time, but Dan also knew that we were hardworking and heart-willing volunteers. We had rallied folks together for some chore, I don't know, loading up stuff or making signs or stuffing envelopes. I can't recall. Dan arrived. My crew were involved in a very competitive game of flashlight tag. And you can imagine Dan's frustration. But he took it in stride. He knew we'd get to the work at hand, but that he'd have to entertain this quasi-adult recess first. And he tolerated it. Yeah. And much to my memory's delight, he participated. Every moment is an organizing opportunity, and every person a potential activist. I will remember Dan often, including and especially every time I write a note on the back of my hand. Dan was truly a good person, and our communities are better off because of Dan. May we all remember Dan, how hard he worked for others and how hard he worked for us. And remember to ask, what would Dan do?
PC here? Okay. Here. Okay.
Cannot see any of you out there. But I know you're here. I'm glad you're here. And I might sound a little angry, but let me say something nice first. Matt, he really loved you. Spoke of you guys often. Matt, he really loved you. So this is stream of consciousness and no prepared speech. One of the things that I think about Dan and his efforts is the myth of Sisyphus. And I once gave him a birthday present that was very small, but I think said pretty much what I saw going on. It was a little rock, probably about that size, very smooth on the outside, probably rolled with water in the tides. But in the center of it, it had it's not a divot, it's not a divot, it's a wash where water had hollowed out this hard stone. The water didn't stop. It made an impression. And so did Dan. Now let me add some of my own feelings. we have a tyrant trying to work his way into our government, our souls, our lives. And I want you to do something that kind of annoyed me. When Dan died, many people rallied around to say how good he was, how much good he did. I want you to take his work to your hands and make it not a myth, but do something about it. If for no other reason, it's your life that's on the line. So Dan was obsessive, and it's a good thing he was. Tenacious? Yeah, but obsessive. Nobody else would have thought that they could reverse the ways of international disorder, change the police. And I'm also reminded of something we had in common, which was when we saw the Rose Parade come to town, and they would bring the boats out in the river and have the fireworks. We knew that people who'd actually been in war did not see that as entertainment. PTSD, all over again. Don't let Dan Handelman be a memory that you hold up like Dr. King. Oh, one day we will have, no, make it happen.
Danny, as he was known when we were growing up, or Dan to most of you here today, was, as you've heard from a lot of people, a complex human. As a young person, he was funny, quirky, smart, creative, and a really inquisitive person, and a terrible practical joker. One of our friends described him growing up that he was a mix of idealism and scorn, with a good amount of Monty Python mixed in. He didn't respect people for who they were, but for what they did. In school, he always had a good sense of humor. He had funny nicknames for all of us, most of which I'm not going to repeat in mixed company. He'd leave us long notes, and they were clever enough that I've still kept some of them. I couldn't find one to bring today, but I know I've got some kicking around. He loved spontaneous games and pulling pranks, or just doing things to see what would happen. Some of his practical jokes were spur of the moment, but many of them were elaborate and well thought out. A few, in retrospect, might not have been the best idea, but we didn't get caught, and the fire department probably had something to laugh about later. But for all his clowning around and teasing us, he was never mean. His joking was never done to be hurtful or at anybody's expense. He had a deep kindness and a sense of caring about his friends and about the people around him. That showed in his amazing ability to draw different people together and make them care about things. Take a second to look around you at all the diverse people here, and that tells you all you ever need to know about him. Dan, you made a difference in people's lives, and that's a pretty darn good legacy to leave behind. We'll miss you, my friend.
Thank you to Will, Shelda, PC, and Lisa. So we have until about 12:15 or so, and we have to give the theater back to the Clinton Street Theater folks. So we have time for a few more people to share their memories of Dan, but I'm going to ask that people keep it to about 3 minutes if possible. So please come to the edge of the staircase, and there's 2 chairs, and you can line up, and we'll alternate starting on this side, and then we'll go to this side. And a reminder that 3 minutes is, if you can keep it to 3 minutes, please do. I might tap you on the shoulder gently just to make sure that everybody else has the opportunity to speak. We are having the potluck after this, so folks who don't get to share right now, right here, can share at the potluck. Please be sure to introduce yourself before sharing. As a reminder, the stage is being broadcast and recorded and will be played at a later date on the open access community television. And after the last person, after we get to around 12:15 or noon 15, I'll return and give some exit instructions and information about the potluck. So I will invite Joanne Hardesty.
I did not want the opportunity to pass to tell you about how challenging it was sometimes to work with Dan. I didn't want anybody to leave and think like he was like a god or a saint. He was a human being. He was passionate about what he did. And I remember as they were reporting back to the city council for the police oversight board, the commission that was putting together the new police oversight board, they would come to city council and his subcommittee members would say, well, we had 4 meetings this week. And I would say 4 meetings? And each meeting was like 3 or 4 hours long. And I would beg him at city council, Dan, please, everybody doesn't like going to meetings every night like you. You're gonna lose people if you keep having 3 to 4 meetings a week. And he would say, yeah, but we've got so much we've gotta cover, right? And it was true, we had a lot to cover, but because he was so committed to this work. And I've had the privilege of knowing him for almost 30 years. And it's always been him showing up to support families of loved ones who've been lost at the hands of police. I will say he was the humblest man I've ever met. He would never show up and go, I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. He would show up with his red wagon, his protest signs, his megaphone, and he would show up any place people wanted him to be. To me, that's a true community hero. Someone who doesn't ask what position somebody's in. A community member needs help. A community member needs information. A community member needs to know that the community will stand up and support them. I loved working with Dan. We spent so many hours talking to the Department of Justice around how are we going to fix what's broken in our system. And I can honestly say over 30 years, I had never heard him say, we should just give up and just go home because this is like useless. I would say that sometimes. Why are we still doing this? This is absolutely useless. And he would go, no, we have to keep pushing. We have to keep pushing. I heard someone ask you this a little earlier, and I'm going to ask you on behalf of Dan, please don't ignore the new Police Oversight Commission. Please don't ignore the new city council, right? None of us can fill the role that Dan did, but each of us can take a piece of the work that he worked on and make a commitment that we're not going to let that work die. It is too important, too vital, and too necessary. Thank you. And on a final note, I just want to say to Dan's family, thank you so much for giving him to us so much, because I know you paid a lot in letting him do what he did for this community. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Mark Chassie. My brother, James Chassie. have a hard time reading my notes around the microphone. My name is Mark Chassie. My brother, James Chassie Jr., was beaten by the Portland police to death on September 17th, 2006. I first learned about what happened to Jim the next evening. It was emotional and disorienting. I couldn't believe it. I soon found stories where the city and the police said Jim was homeless, extremely violent, and urinating in public across from Pearl District diners. I knew immediately they were lying. Jim lived in a nearby apartment, and he was painfully shy and a pacifist. These weren't just lies, they were an offense to my brother's entire existence, his humanity, who he was. The propaganda about Jim compounded the grief. It was like the city and the police were defiling my brother's grave after they had just put him in it. The evening's news promised to have more information. There were witnesses. Then a reporter interviewed this guy named Dan Handelman from Portland Cop Watch. He talked about other recent police encounters that resembled what he'd heard about Jim. Dan gave me hope that someone else got it. Someone knew that what they were saying about Jim might not be true. I met Dan soon after at my brother's funeral. I was comforted by his sincerity, kindness, and empathy. I was also completely floored by his vast knowledge about policing issues in Portland. As more information came out that contradicted the propaganda, Dan provided more context. He also helped connect us with a community that was upset and outraged about what had happened to Jim, helping to organize a citizens committee and public events. Dan was an unbelievable help at a horrible time. Speaking about my brother and what happened to him is hard for me, even when it's been almost 19 years. There are likely other people here whose loved ones died from police violence, and they can relate to what I'm saying. It's incredible that Dan would voluntarily reach out to help people he didn't know in the midst of personal tragedy. Of course, the work took a toll on Dan. He was a very empathetic person. The media and the public knew Dan mainly as for his public advocacy, but he was also an amazing person. Dan was the extremely rare type of advocate that our system demands for effective police oversight. Someone who is consistently dedicated to it for several years without expecting payment. Dan was an angel among us. My family was, and the entire city of Portland was, blessed to have had Dan Handelman in our lives. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to invite up anybody else who'd like to say a few words. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Modell. Hope I can get through this. I don't have anything prepared to say, but one of the things I want to say is I love the fact that you all got to know Dan so well, the tenacity he had, the concern he had for the world, and his wonderful, peaceful, kind, lovable self. He had such a great sense of humor. And he loved you guys so much. He cared so much about this community. I'm his, I didn't introduce myself, I'm his first cousin, his twin first cousin. We were a month apart. Every time we had a birthday, he always was the first to wish me a happy birthday. I heard that from other people too. and especially milestone years were for us, where he would always say, this is a new chapter for us. This is our new chapter. What's going to be new for you this year? This was a milestone year for us, and I hope that in the way that everybody's saying here, that he inspired you, I hope that you'll take the work going forward and think of Dan as you do it, because I know we will think of you and all that will be happening here and in our lives as his family. I think you, whoever, I can't remember, one of you said that you thanked the family for letting Dan do this work. We thank you for being there with him too. You were an amazing support system for him and his family in a huge way too. That's it.
Okay, we have two more speakers. Come on up, Dr. Haynes and Pastor Knutson.
Dr. Haynes will be hosting this service at 3 o'clock tomorrow at Allen Temple for Dan. And so to wife Barbara and brother Matt and the whole family, we just want to say on behalf of the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform that Dan was a part of, we give thanks for his life, his commitment. We always rotated the meetings between Allen Temple, Maranatha Church, and Augustana. If you weren't sure what meeting you were going to, you just looked for that car of his. But I think Dr. Haynes and I would agree that there was a spirit to Dan Handelman that transcended any one tradition. We always talk about people of faith, people of goodwill, who work for justice and peace, and he certainly embodied that. I was with a group of young leaders recently and used a passage, and they said, wow, it's wonderful you're quoting the play Hamilton. But as Dan knew, because Dan knew his Hebrew scriptures, we were quoting Isaiah. And I think of Dan marching together before the wars broke out in 2001. I think of the police reform, Dr. Haynes and Dr. T. Allen Bethel calling the Department of Justice to come to Portland to investigate police practices and the use of deadly force, and then forming the coalition that many became part of and being on the steering committee for many years with Dan, led by Dr. Haynes and Dr. T. Allen Bethel. Shauna Comfy was a lawyer, Ashley Albies, of course. So many part of that, Joanne Hardesty on the steering committee. But I think of Dan, and I think of that passage from Isaiah, nation shall not lift up, God shall judge among the nations. They shall beat their swords in the plowshares, their spears in the pruning hooks. Nation shall not rise up, lift up sword against nation, neither shall we study war anymore. But everyone will sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. That was Dan's vision of what must be. Dr. Haynes.
I want to personally thank this beloved family for lending Dan to us. To really understand Dan, you must think in terms that this was his calling. It was a calling upon him that was mandated and that drove him. When I think about Dan, I think about John Brown and the spirit of Brown, who was an advocate during the time of slavery and could not be stopped, could not be hindered, but a spirit that gave his life for the abolishment of slavery. Dan was in that mode as a civil rights leader since the age of 13, when I marched with Dr. King and became a community organizer with SELC and became an organizer with SNCC, with John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. And and became the co-founder of the Black Panther Party in the state of Texas. Dan was in that spirit. When I first met Dan some 30 years ago, that spirit reminded me of the SNCC workers in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. Dan would have been right there with us. His spirit exumed. He was a freedom fighter for freedom, justice, and equality. He was a fighter for peace, an end to war, a fighter for racial reconciliation. And so let us not forget this brilliant mind. But more than a brilliant mind, he was a humanitarian, a lover of humanity. And his spirit is an American icon, and we should always keep alive his name. Thank you very much.
I forgot a couple things. I've been wearing Dan's clothes for the past 2.5 months. And I chose this shirt because it sort of embodies what Joanne was saying, that if we all get together, we're big enough to fix all the problems. And then I was supposed to have a pop-up ad in the middle of my talk. We had people from Dignity Village come out and help us with cleaning out our carport, which was a big job. And I just wanted to say they did a fabulous job. Scott, Thomas, and Kenny, they had, Scott has a truck. They really want work. They're very good workers. They're very nice, a lot of fun. I told them I'd let people know that they're looking for work. And I figured since I have a captive audience, I'd do it here. And also a quick PSA. High blood pressure is a silent killer. I think most of you have stressful jobs, which causes high blood pressure. So I would ask you to check your blood pressure. We can't afford to lose any more people young. And I hope everyone will come to the picnic at Woodstock Park, get to know each other, so we can all work together. Thank you. When? 1 o'clock?
Yeah, after this. In your program, there is, on the last page at Woodstock Park, it's the corner of, corner of Southeast Steel and 47th Ave. There's street parking along 47th Ave, also on 46 or Southeast Herald. There is one paved path, to the gathering spot. And if you have mobility needs, the best entry is from the crosswalk at Southeast 49th across Steel. This information is in the programs that you received. If anybody doesn't have one, please find me and let me know. Donna will get you one. So we're really inviting everybody to come back and celebrate and share food and laughter and more stories of Dan. If there's nobody else, I'll just issue a last call for any last speakers. It has been truly wonderful to hear from his family, from Barb, from Matt, reading the comments from his people that knew him when he was younger. That what struck me about those Facebook messages that you read, Matt, where people saw Dan's heart. He has been a consistent person throughout his life that touched so many people and made such an impact. And I know everybody is here because they felt impacted by Dan, and I think that's a wonderful feeling. And that we get to grieve and celebrate together is really important. It's been an absolute honor to be part of this. Did you want to speak before I close out? Sure. Okay. I will hold that thought until the end.
My name's Kathleen Juergens. I worked with Dan back in the 90s, and a whole lot of things happened since then. I'm a big believer in diversity of tactics. I'm somebody who went on to be engaged with activism in very different ways from Dan, but when I was younger and starting out, he was one of the people who encouraged me and was always there. After years of street battles with the police and getting arrested, and some things changed in my life. I physically can't be doing everything I was doing before, and I've been in the house a lot, especially since COVID. Dan's emails and seeing that Dan was still out there, still doing what he was doing 30 years ago. I'm older, further on in life, being older, I'm more appreciative of that hanging in there. Actually, one of the things I used to do when I was out in the community a lot was I would come to protest with my guitar. I would come to city council with my guitar. And so the actions that I was doing with Dan and Peace and Justice Works, a lot of times I was offering a song. So I was wondering, I thought it might be meaningful to do a sing-along song to close things out that is one of the ones that we used to sing together at the events where Dan was organizing. This is from Jewish tradition. It also has English words, and I think people can sing along. I think you'll know it. Lo yisagona goy cherev, lo yilmedu od milchama. 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 And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And unto plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. Dan Handelman, presente.
Thank you so much for that. So as a final announcement, there is DVDs for free over here, Arresting Power, Resisting Police Violence in Portland, Oregon. Dan plays a role in this documentary, so you're welcome to these copies. They're up front here. It has been a really wonderful morning to spend with you all. Again, on behalf of Barb Green, Matt Handelman, and the Board of Peace and Justice Works, we're grateful for your presence today. I want to give a special thank you to Linda Tomasi, who organized, and Jason Renault, who helped organize this here today. And we will see you at the potluck. Thank you, everybody.